a stormy night, a tiny puppy appeared at the doors of a veterinary clinic, dragging a worn bag almost bigger than his fragile body. His paws trembled, his eyes pleaded, and his fur was soaked through by the rain. The vet, stepping outside, froze in disbelief. What could possibly be inside that bag? What drove this little soul to beg for help in such desperation? What followed was not just shocking, it was heart-stirring. A tale that would restore faith in compassion, loyalty, and the mysterious instincts of animals. Stay tuned, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The night had swallowed the town in a curtain of darkness, broken only by the relentless downpour of rain that hammered against rooftops and flooded narrow streets. The street lamps flickered weakly, their pale glow barely piercing through the sheets of water cascading from the sky. The air was heavy with thunder, and each distant rumble made the ground tremble as though the storm itself carried a warning. Most people hurried indoors, closing their doors tightly against the chaos outside, never sparing a thought for what the night might be hiding. On nights like this, survival belonged only to the strong or the desperate. From the shadows emerged a tiny figure, fragile yet determined. A golden-furred puppy stumbled forward, his small paws splashing through muddy puddles, his body soaked to the bone. His tail drooped low, ears pressed flat against his drenched head, but his eyes, wide, pleading, and filled with resolve, told a different story. Between his teeth, he clutched the edge of a rough, oversized bag, dragging it across the wet pavement. The bag was nearly as large as his entire body, its weight forcing him to stop every few steps to catch his breath, yet he refused to let go. Something inside was far too important. Every corner of the street whispered abandonment. Cars passed by without slowing, their headlights momentarily illuminating the pitiful sight before vanishing into the storm. The few pedestrians that hurried past turned their faces away, eager to escape the rain, blind to the courage unfolding at their feet. But the puppy didn't falter. His legs trembled, his fur clung to his shivering frame, yet he pressed on with the determination of a creature carrying more than just a burden. He carried hope. Each tug of the bag echoed a silent plea for help, a desperate message only the kind-hearted would understand. The storm showed no mercy, lashing at him with wind and cold, but something guided his path. His paws, though weary, led him toward a faint light ahead, a small building with the word veterinary glinting on its sign. His heart pounded, instinct urging him forward. He knew, in the way animals often do, that behind that door was the only chance left. Gathering the last of his strength, the puppy dragged the bag up to the doorstep, his tiny body collapsing against it. With one paw trembling, he scratched faintly at the door, praying someone inside would hear. The door did not open immediately. For a moment, the little puppy remained slumped against the bag, his body shivering violently from the cold. His chest rose and fell in uneven bursts, his breath forming faint clouds in the chill of the night. Every muscle ached, but deep inside, a stubborn fire refused to let him surrender. With a weak whimper, he rose again, his paws slipping slightly on the wet stone step. He pressed his tiny body forward, nuzzling the bag as though reminding himself of the purpose that had brought him here. The bag was heavy, far too heavy for a creature so small. Its rough fabric was soaked, dragging against the ground with a stubborn resistance. Each time the puppy tugged it forward, the strain rippled through his fragile frame. His teeth clamped down tightly, unwilling to let go despite the pain. He staggered backward, then pulled again, inch by inch, dragging it closer to the door. The sound of fabric scraping against stone echoed faintly under the storm, but to him, it was a battle cry, proof that he had not given up yet. Passers-by, shielded under umbrellas, slowed only for a second. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others hurried on without so much as a glance. To them it was just a stray, another forgotten animal struggling against the world. But the truth was far greater. In his desperate struggle lay a story that none of them could see, a story that would one day touch hearts beyond imagination. Yet for now he stood alone in his fight. The world hurried by, blind to his determination. The rain plastered his fur flat against his body, chilling him to the bone. Water dripped from his ears, his tail, his trembling whiskers. His eyes stung, not just from the storm, but from exhaustion. Still, he lifted his head toward the door, gazing at it with a mix of hope and pleading. His soft whimpers grew louder, desperate to pierce through the heavy silence inside. If no one answered, he knew he would not have the strength to return again. This was his final chance. At last, as though sensing the weight of his struggle, he dropped the bag gently and raised his front paws. Balancing unsteadily on his hind legs, he pressed them together in a motion so human-like, it looked like a prayer. The storm roared around him, but he stood there begging silently at the door, his soaked figure trembling yet resolute. To anyone watching, it was a sight that could break the hardest heart. A helpless soul who refused to quit, carrying a message of urgency locked inside that tattered bag. The night seemed to pause in reverence of his determination. Somewhere beyond the door, a light flickered and footsteps approached. The puppy's ears perked weakly, his eyes wide with anticipation. His struggle had carried him here, and though his strength was nearly gone, his spirit had endured. What happened next would determine everything. The door creaked open slowly, the warm glow of light spilling into the storm's darkness. Standing there was a man in a white coat, his expression shifting from weariness to shock as his eyes fell on the tiny creature at his doorstep. Rain poured harder, soaking the ground around them, but the puppy did not move. Instead, he lifted his trembling paws, pressing them together once more in that pleading gesture, his wide eyes fixed on the man as though begging for mercy. For a heartbeat, the vet could not believe what he was seeing. Kneeling down, the vet's face softened with concern. "What on earth?" he murmured, his voice barely audible against the rain. His gaze dropped to the sodden bag lying beside the pup. The fabric was worn and heavy with water, its knotted top bulging slightly as though hiding a secret. He reached out cautiously, but his attention was drawn back to the puppy's desperate whimper. It was not the cry of an animal asking for food or shelter. It was something deeper, more urgent. The dog's small body leaned against the bag, unwilling to let it be ignored. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a deafening crack of thunder that made the puppy flinch but not retreat. The vet quickly scooped him into his arms, startled by how light and frail he felt. His tiny chest heaved with exhaustion, and yet his gaze never strayed far from the bag on the step. The vet's heart tightened. Whatever was inside that bag mattered to him, perhaps even more than his own survival. With one arm holding the trembling puppy close, the vet reached down with the other and lifted the bag. Its unexpected weight made him pause, his brows knitting in worry. He glanced once more at the drenched puppy, whose whimper rose into a faint cry, urging him inside. Without another second of hesitation, the man turned and hurried into the clinic, kicking the door shut behind him. The storm raged on outside, but within those walls, a new story was about to unfold. The exhausted puppy finally let his head fall against the vet's chest, his eyes fluttering closed in relief. He had made it. He had delivered the bag. Now it was up to the man to discover the truth hidden within. Inside the clinic, the storm's roar faded into the background, replaced by the steady hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of antiseptic. The vet gently set the puppy on a soft blanket, his heart aching at the sight of the soaked, shivering creature. He quickly wrapped a towel around the little body, rubbing lightly to warm him, but even then the puppy's gaze never wavered. His tired eyes kept darting toward the heavy, dripping bag the vet had placed on the table nearby. It was as if the pup refused to rest until the truth inside was uncovered. The vet crouched down, meeting those pleading eyes. "You didn't come here for yourself, did you?" he whispered, more to himself than to the animal. The puppy whimpered in response, nudging his nose weakly in the bag's direction. A chill rippled through the vet's spine. He was used to people carrying pets in, sometimes in boxes or crates, but never had he seen an animal bring something to him, dragging it across a stormy night no less. This was no ordinary situation. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the bag. The rough cloth was soaked through and it sagged heavily in his grip. Carefully he untied the knotted string, his breath quickening with anticipation. The puppy rose weakly onto unsteady legs, his ears perking despite his exhaustion. His soft whine filled the room as if urging the man to hurry. The vet paused for a moment, his heart pounding, then slowly peeled back the opening. Inside, shadows shifted against the dim light. He leaned closer, his eyes widening as he realized what he was looking at. The contents weren't ordinary belongings. His mouth went dry, words caught in his throat. Whatever lay within had driven this tiny puppy to fight through the storm, to collapse at his door, to beg for help in a way no animal ever should. He turned back to the puppy, stunned. The little dog's entire body trembled, but not just from the cold. His eyes, glistening and desperate, stayed fixed on the bag as if begging the vet to understand. The man swallowed hard, emotions rising in his chest. He had seen countless cases of neglect and cruelty in his career, but this was something different, something extraordinary. In that moment, the vet knew he had been chosen. Whether by fate, by chance, or by the unbreakable will of this puppy, the responsibility now rested on his shoulders. He closed the bag carefully, his decision firm. Whatever secret the puppy had carried through the storm, it was his duty to protect it and to uncover the truth. The vet reached out, gently stroking the puppy's soaked fur. "You did well," he murmured softly. "Now let me do my part." The puppy let out a faint sigh, his eyes drooping with exhaustion, but his spirit, unbroken, flickered in that small, determined gaze. Something remarkable was about to unfold, and neither of them could turn back now. The clinic was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the faint patter of rain against the windows. The vet stood over the bag, his hands hovering just above it, his heart heavy with anticipation. The puppy lay curled on the blanket, his eyes half closed from exhaustion. But every time the man touched the bag, the little dog stirred, ears twitching, gaze sharpening. It was as though he refused to let the secret remain hidden any longer. With a steadying breath, the vet untied the knot once more, his fingers carefully peeling back the damp cloth. The smell of wet fabric filled the air, but underneath it came another scent, faint, fragile, almost drowned out by the storm. His brow furrowed, his pulse racing faster. Slowly he reached inside. His fingers brushed against something warm, something soft. For a moment he froze. Then he lifted the bundle gently into the light. Nestled inside was a tiny creature smaller than his palm, a newborn puppy, its fur still patchy, its eyes sealed shut. It whimpered faintly, its fragile chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The vet's eyes widened in disbelief. Another life had been hidden in this bag, one far too delicate to have survived a stormy night alone. He looked back at the drenched golden pup lying on the blanket, realization dawning. The older one had dragged this bag all the way here, not for himself but to save this newborn. The vet swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. Gently, he set the tiny pup on a soft towel and checked its vitals. The little heartbeat fluttered weakly beneath his fingertips. It was alive, but only just. Without intervention, it would never survive the night. The vet glanced at the older puppy, who whined softly, struggling to stand, his gaze never leaving the newborn. He nudged his nose toward it as though saying, "This is why I came." The man's chest ached at the sight. He had seen loyalty in dogs countless times, but this was different. This was sacrifice. A fragile puppy, barely old enough to fend for himself, had braved the storm to save another even more helpless than him. "Incredible," the vet whispered, his hands moving swiftly now. He warmed a bottle of milk, cradled the newborn gently, and coaxed it to feed. Each small swallow felt like a victory, each sigh of breath a miracle. Meanwhile, the older pup lay weakly on the blanket, his eyes heavy but never closing fully. He watched intently, his tiny body refusing rest until he saw the newborn safe. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his breath shallow with exhaustion, but he managed a faint wag of his tail as the baby suckled at the bottle. The vet couldn't help but smile, though his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You're a hero, little one," he murmured. "A true guardian." Minutes stretched into hours as the storm raged outside, but inside warmth and hope filled the room. The newborn grew stronger under the vet's care, its cries louder, its movements steadier. The older pup finally allowed himself to close his eyes, his tiny body relaxing for the first time. He had done what he came to do. The vet gently covered him with a fresh towel, whispering words of comfort. As he looked at both puppies resting now under his care, the vet realized this was no ordinary night. The bag had carried not just a fragile life but also a powerful message about loyalty, courage, and the unspoken bond that exists even between the smallest of souls. And though questions remained about how these pups had ended up abandoned in the storm, one truth was already clear. This story was only beginning. The clinic grew quieter as the newborn finally drifted into a fragile sleep. Its tiny body nestled safely in a heated blanket. The vet exhaled in relief, but his gaze quickly shifted to the older pup lying nearby. Though his body begged for rest, his eyes remained wide and watchful, fixed firmly on the infant. Every time the vet moved toward the newborn, the golden-furred puppy whimpered, his ears twitching, his paw lifting slightly as if to say, "Don't forget him." The vet knelt beside him, stroking his damp fur. "You've done enough, little one. You should rest now." But the puppy refused. He pushed his nose toward the smaller blanket, straining against his exhaustion. His tiny claws scratched faintly at the floor, his body trembling with effort. Despite being drenched and weak, he would not allow himself the comfort of sleep until he was certain the baby was safe. His breathing was shallow, his frame fragile, yet a fierce determination burned within him. He tried to rise, his legs wobbling under his weight, and took a shaky step closer to the newborn. Each movement looked painful, yet he pressed on, collapsing at the edge of the smaller pup's bedding. There, with the last of his strength, he curled protectively around the tiny life he had fought so hard to save. The vet's heart clenched at the sight. This was no ordinary bond. Most animals fought for themselves, but this one, barely more than a baby himself, had chosen sacrifice. His instinct was not survival, but protection, an unyielding loyalty that defied his frail body. His soft whines filled the room, not of fear but of insistence, as if pleading with the vet to do everything in his power. For a long moment, the man simply watched. He had treated countless cases of abandonment, cruelty, and neglect, but this was different. This was love in its purest form, silent, selfless, unwavering. He crouched beside the two pups, his voice breaking slightly. "I promise you," he whispered, "I'll keep him safe. Both of you." Only then did the older puppy allow himself to lower his head beside the newborn, his eyes finally closing. But even in sleep, his body pressed close. His warmth offered as a shield against the cold night he had braved. His tiny chest rose and fell, uneven but steady, carrying the weight of relief. He had delivered his charge to safety, and now, for the first time, he trusted someone else to protect what he loved most. The vet sat back, shaken by the depth of what he had witnessed. This was more than desperation. It was devotion, the kind that changed hearts and rewrote destinies. And as the storm raged outside, he knew this was only the beginning of a story that would move the world. The vet glanced at the clock on the wall. It was past midnight, and the storm outside showed no sign of easing. His clinic was small, his resources limited. Saving one fragile life was already a challenge, but now he had two, both weak, both in desperate need of care. He knew he couldn't do this alone. Wiping his damp hands on his coat, he reached for the phone, determination flickering in his eyes. The first call went to his assistant, a young woman who often helped during emergencies. Her voice was groggy when she answered, but as soon as she heard the urgency in his tone, sleep vanished. "Two puppies?" she repeated in disbelief. "Want a newborn? I'm on my way." The vet thanked her quickly, his relief audible, before dialing again. This time it was a fellow veterinarian in the next district, someone he trusted with critical cases. Within minutes, word began to spread. Compassion has a way of moving quickly, even through stormy nights. A neighbor who lived nearby offered to bring fresh blankets and milk formula. Another promised to drive over with a small incubator she used for rescues. The vet's heart warmed. He had seen apathy so often in the world, but here, in the middle of the storm, kindness was answering the call. Meanwhile, the older pup stirred at the sound of voices, his ears twitching. His body trembled with weakness, but when he saw the vet on the phone, his tail gave a faint wag. It was as if he understood that reinforcements were coming, that help was finally on its way. The newborn let out a tiny whimper, and instantly, the older puppy pressed closer, his protective instinct never faltering. The vet crouched beside them, speaking softly. "Hold on, little ones. You're not alone anymore." For the first time that night, hope filled the small clinic, not just in the warm lights and blankets, but in the knowledge that a community was gathering, answering the desperate plea of a puppy who refused to give up. The clinic lights glowed brighter as the storm outside howled against the windows. The vet rolled up his sleeves, his assistant now by his side, her eyes widening at the sight of the two fragile pups. She quickly laid out supplies, syringes, warm saline drips, clean towels, while the vet examined the newborn with gentle but urgent hands. Its heartbeat was faint, its body dangerously cold. Time was slipping away and every second mattered. The older puppy, though barely able to stand, whimpered anxiously as the vet worked. He tried to drag himself closer, his weak paws scratching against the blanket, his eyes fixed on the baby. The vet glanced at him with a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, little one. I won't let him go." The assistant gently stroked the golden pup's head, her voice soothing, but even her soft words couldn't ease his trembling. His entire being radiated worry, as though he alone carried the weight of his sibling's survival. The vet inserted a tiny tube into the newborn's mouth, carefully feeding it warmed milk drop by drop. At first the baby was too weak to respond, its body limp, its breath shallow. But then after a tense pause, its tongue flickered weakly and a faint swallow followed. Relief washed over the room like sunlight breaking through the storm. The assistant gasped softly. "He's trying." The vet's shoulders eased, though his focus never wavered. "That's it, little one. Keep fighting." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they worked tirelessly. Warm compresses were placed around the newborn, its fragile body slowly gaining heat. The vet checked its heartbeat again, his fingers steady but tense. The rhythm, though faint, had grown stronger. The older puppy, watching with glassy eyes, let out a faint sigh, his tail twitching once in quiet relief. He lowered his head onto the blanket but kept his gaze locked on the scene, refusing to close his eyes completely. The assistant moved to prepare fluids for the older pup, who was clearly dehydrated and exhausted. He resisted at first, his weak body pulling away from the syringe of electrolytes, his eyes darting back to the newborn. But the vet spoke firmly. "You need strength too. If you want to protect him, you must let us help you." The pup hesitated, then gave in, his small body trembling as the fluids entered. Slowly, color returned to his gums and his breaths grew steadier. By the time the clock neared 2 in the morning, both puppies had shown signs of improvement. The newborn, though still fragile, twitched in its sleep, its tiny chest rising and falling with more stability. The older pup finally relaxed, his eyelids heavy but his body pressed protectively against the baby's side. The vet and his assistant exchanged a quiet glance, their exhaustion mingling with relief. Against the storm, against the odds, the first battle had been won. The clinic had grown calm, the storm outside now reduced to a steady drizzle tapping softly against the windows. Both puppies rested under the glow of a small lamp, their fragile bodies wrapped in warmth. Yet the vet's mind was far from calm. As he sat beside them, exhaustion pulling at his shoulders, his gaze kept drifting back to the bag. It still sat on the table, damp and heavy, its faded fabric hinting at secrets yet to be uncovered. He knew that understanding its story was the key to understanding the pups themselves. Carefully, he reopened the bag, this time not to pull out life but to search for answers. Inside, alongside the newborn's tiny blanket, he found scraps of torn cloth, faint traces of food, and a crumpled note smeared by rain. His hands tightened as he unfolded it, squinting under the lamplight. The handwriting was hurried, shaky, but the words were clear enough. "I can't take care of them. Please, save them if you can." His chest tightened, a sigh escaping his lips. He glanced back at the golden puppy, who now stirred slightly, his ears twitching at the faint rustle of paper, as if he too knew the weight of those words. The vet leaned back in his chair, heart heavy. Someone had abandoned these fragile lives, leaving them to fate. And yet, instead of vanishing into the storm, this little guardian had chosen to fight, to carry the burden across the night until he found safety. It was both heartbreaking and extraordinary. The assistant, who had returned with fresh supplies, paused when she saw the note in his hand. "So they were left behind?" she asked softly. The vet nodded, his jaw tightening. "Left to die in the storm. But he gestured to the older pup. He refused to let that happen." Her eyes filled with quiet awe as she looked at the small dog curled protectively around the newborn. "He's more than just a survivor. He's a savior." The vet's mind raced with questions. Who had left them? Why the secrecy? And why abandon them in such a cruel way? But alongside the questions rose gratitude for the courage of a single puppy who refused to surrender. He traced his fingers gently along the note again. The words carried guilt but also a plea. Perhaps whoever had written them couldn't bear to see the pups suffer, but at least had hoped someone kind would intervene. As dawn's first light began to seep through the clinic curtains, the vet sat in silence, piecing the fragments together. The bag wasn't just a vessel. It was a desperate attempt to give the puppies a chance at life. And though its sender had walked away, This little golden pup had carried the mission to completion. He had dragged not just fabric and weight, but responsibility, loyalty, and love. The vet folded the note and tucked it safely into his pocket. Looking down at the two sleeping pups, he whispered, "I don't know who left you, but I know this. You're safe now, and I'll make sure you never feel abandoned again." The newborn shifted slightly, letting out a soft cry, and instantly the older pup stirred, pressing closer as though reassured by the words. In that moment, the vet realized something profound. This wasn't just about uncovering who had abandoned them. It was about what they had uncovered in him, a renewed faith in resilience and sacrifice, and in the extraordinary power of even the smallest lives to tell the greatest stories. The morning light crept into the clinic, painting the room in pale gold. For a brief moment, everything seemed calm. The storm had passed, the newborn slept quietly, and the older pup lay curled around him like a watchful guardian. But peace never lasted long in situations this fragile. The vet's heart sank as he leaned closer to the newborn and noticed the shallow rise and fall of its chest had slowed. Its tiny body twitched weakly, its breathing uneven. The fight wasn't over. The vet quickly motioned to his assistant. "Prepare oxygen, now." His voice cut through the stillness, urgent and firm. She rushed to comply, pulling equipment from the shelf while the vet gently lifted the newborn. Its body felt lighter than air, frighteningly limp. He placed the tiny pup in a padded cradle and secured the oxygen tube, praying it would respond. The machine hissed softly, filling the air with a sterile sound that seemed louder than thunder. The older puppy woke at once, his ears perking sharply at the sudden movement. He whimpered, scrambling to his shaky feet, his paws dragging across the blanket as he tried to follow. His eyes locked on the cradle, panic etched in every sound he made. He barked weakly, his body pressing against the table leg as if demanding to be closer. The assistant glanced at him, her eyes soft. "He knows," she whispered. "He feels everything." The vet's hands moved quickly, massaging the newborn's chest with careful precision. Each second felt like an eternity, the air heavy with dread. The little body convulsed once, then stilled again. For a heartbeat, the room went silent, broken only by the older pup's desperate whines. The vet clenched his jaw. "Come on, little one. Don't give up now." He increased the oxygen flow, his determination unshaken. Then, faintly, a small cry escaped the newborn, weak but alive. The rise and fall of its chest steadied, its heartbeat growing stronger under the vet's fingers. Relief washed over the room like a flood. The assistant let out the breath she had been holding, whispering, "Thank goodness." The older pup's cries softened, his trembling easing as he settled back onto the floor, though his eyes never left the cradle. The vet stroked the golden puppy's head gently. "You did it. He's still here. Your fight isn't wasted." The little dog wagged his tail faintly, collapsing back onto the blanket, his eyes filled with exhaustion, but also a quiet triumph. He hadn't stopped believing, not for a second, even when death hovered close. The clinic returned to a fragile calm, but everyone in the room knew this was just one battle in a longer war. Both puppies had a long road ahead, and survival would demand every ounce of strength they had left. Yet with the vet's steady hands and the older pup's unwavering spirit, there was hope, and sometimes, hope was the greatest medicine of all. Word of the extraordinary rescue spread faster than the storm clouds clearing over the town. By mid-morning, the small clinic, usually quiet and tucked away from notice, began to draw curious eyes. Neighbors who had glimpsed the puppy dragging the bag through the storm now arrived at the door, their faces filled with wonder and sympathy. Some carried blankets, others small bags of food, each eager to play a part in the miracle that was unfolding inside. The vet, though tired from a sleepless night, greeted them with gratitude. "They're still fragile," he explained softly, "but they're fighting." The crowd leaned in, peering through the glass windows where the two pups lay under warm lamps. Gasps of amazement rippled through them as they saw the golden puppy pressed protectively against the newborn. For many, the sight was almost too much to bear, the image of loyalty in its purest form. An elderly woman stepped forward, her voice trembling. "That little one carried the bag all the way here. I saw him. I didn't think he'd make it." Tears filled her eyes as she laid down a hand-knit blanket. A child clutched his father's leg, whispering, "Can we help them too, Daddy?" The father nodded, placing a small box of milk formula into the vet's hands. Compassion, once invisible in the storm, now flowed freely, warming the clinic more than any heater ever could. Inside, the golden puppy stirred as if sensing the presence of his growing circle of protectors. His ears twitched at the murmurs outside the window and his tail wagged faintly. The newborn shifted in its sleep, its tiny breath steadier now as though comforted by the invisible embrace of the community. The vet stood quietly for a moment, moved not only by the courage of his small patients but by the goodness blooming around them. For once, the burden did not feel his alone. These two fragile lives, brought together by desperation and resilience, had become more than just patients. They were a symbol. A reminder that even in the darkest storm, kindness could gather like sunlight, breaking through the clouds one act at a time. The clinic buzzed with warmth and quiet conversation as neighbors lingered, their hearts tied to the fragile lives inside. The vet, though grateful for the support, couldn't shake the questions that gnawed at him. Who had left the puppies in such a state? Why risk their lives in a storm instead of seeking help openly? The note in the bag had explained little, just a plea, and yet something about it felt incomplete, as though another secret still lingered in the shadows of that night. Later that afternoon, as the newborn slept peacefully and the golden pup dozed nearby, the vet returned to the worn bag once again. He had emptied it before, or so he thought, but exhaustion could have clouded his thoroughness. Turning it upside down, he shook it gently. A small clink echoed in the quiet room. From the damp folds tumbled a rusted locket, its chain tangled and broken. The vet's brow furrowed. It wasn't just an abandoned carrier. It held a fragment of someone's story. He picked it up, carefully wiping away the grime. Inside the locket was a faded photograph, a young girl smiling brightly, her arms wrapped around a golden puppy strikingly similar to the one lying on the blanket. His heart tightened. This wasn't just coincidence. The pup he had saved might once have been a beloved companion. But if so, what had happened? Why had that same puppy ended up dragging a newborn through a storm, carrying a bag that held remnants of a family's past? The assistant gasped softly as she looked over his shoulder. "That's him," she whispered, pointing to the locket's image. "It has to be." The resemblance was undeniable, the same fur color, the same bright, trusting eyes. The vet set the locket down carefully, his mind racing. The note had begged for help, but the photograph spoke of love. Somewhere between those two truths was a painful story yet untold. Meanwhile, the golden puppy stirred restlessly, his nose twitching toward the table where the locket lay. He let out a faint whimper, his paw twitching as though reaching for something lost. It was as if the small object carried more meaning than anyone could yet understand. The vet crouched beside him, whispering softly, "You carried more than life in that bag, didn't you? You carried memories, too." The discovery left the clinic heavier with mystery. What had driven a family to abandon their beloved pet? Who was the girl in the photo? And why had her puppy risked everything to save another? The answers remained hidden, but the locket's presence changed everything. This was no longer just a rescue. It was a story that stretched back into the past, filled with pain, loyalty, and perhaps even redemption waiting to be uncovered. The vet glanced at the two sleeping pups, his resolve hardening. Their journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about truth, and the promise to protect not only their fragile bodies but also the story they carried within them. Morning sunlight streamed through the clinic windows, washing the room in a warm glow that felt worlds apart from the stormy night before. The newborn stirred first, releasing a soft cry that pierced the stillness. The vet, who had been dozing lightly in a chair, snapped awake and hurried over. His heart lifted at the sound. The cry wasn't weak this time. It carried strength, tiny but unmistakable, like a fragile flame refusing to be extinguished. The golden puppy roused as well, his ears flicking toward the sound. With a shaky effort, he pulled himself closer to the newborn, pressing his nose gently against the tiny body. A low, comforting whimper escaped his throat. The vet watched, moved by the tender act. Despite his exhaustion, the older pup's instinct to protect never faded. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was reassuring, reminding the baby it was not alone. The vet smiled as he prepared a bottle of warm milk. "Let's see how strong you are today," he murmured. The assistant carefully cradled the newborn while the vet guided the bottle. This time, instead of struggling, the baby latched on eagerly. The small sounds of swallowing filled the clinic, a melody of survival that made the assistant's eyes glisten. "He's fighting," she whispered. The vet nodded, his heart swelling. "Yes, and winning." Meanwhile, the golden puppy wagged his tail faintly, his tired eyes shining with relief. He shifted closer, pressing against the vet's leg as though offering his own approval. The man crouched to stroke him, his voice soft. "You did this. Without you, he never would have made it." The pup sighed, curling against the newborn once more, his protective embrace as steady as ever. As the hours passed, signs of progress grew. The newborn's breathing steadied, its tiny limbs stretching more with each nap. The older pup, after days of exhaustion, finally allowed himself longer stretches of rest, his body recovering under care. When he did wake, his tail wagged stronger, and his once weary eyes carried a spark of playfulness. He was no longer just a desperate guardian. He was healing, too. News of their recovery spread quickly through the community. Visitors returned, bringing more supplies, blankets, and even small toys. Children pressed their faces to the glass, giggling as the golden puppy weakly batted at a stuffed ball placed in front of him. The clinic, once a quiet place, now pulsed with warmth and hope. Each person touched by the story of two fragile lives defying the odds. But the most remarkable moment came one afternoon when the newborn, now steadier and louder, let out its first playful bark. It was faint, shaky, but it echoed through the room like a triumph. The golden puppy perked up instantly, his tail thumping against the floor. He leaned down and licked the baby's tiny ear, a proud older brother celebrating a milestone. The vet and his assistant exchanged a smile, both silently acknowledging the miracle they were witnessing. For the first time since the stormy night, the clinic no longer felt heavy with fear. Instead, it hummed with possibility. The bag that had once carried despair now symbolized survival. The puppies, once clinging to life, now carried hope not just for themselves but for everyone who watched them. And as the vet looked at them, two fragile souls bound together by courage, he realized this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with promise. Days passed, and the small clinic that had once echoed with desperate cries now filled with softer sounds, playful barks, gentle whimpers, and the steady rhythm of two lives growing stronger. The newborn's eyes began to open, tiny dark orbs reflecting curiosity and innocence. Its steps were wobbly, its cries louder, each movement a sign of resilience. The golden pup, though still thin, carried himself with newfound energy. No longer just the weary guardian from the storm, he now trotted clumsily after his sibling, nudging and guiding as though embracing his role with pride. The vet watched these moments with quiet wonder. He had seen countless recoveries, but none had ever touched him this deeply. Every wag of the golden pup's tail, every new sound from the baby reminded him of the night they arrived and the fight they had endured together. They weren't just patients anymore, they were family, and that realization left him with a decision to make. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the clinic in amber hues, the vet sat with his assistant. "They've come so far," he said softly, his gaze on the two pups curled together in sleep. "I can't imagine sending them away to an uncertain future." His assistant smiled knowingly. "You've already decided, haven't you?" The vet chuckled, his eyes glistening. "Yes, they belong here with me." The golden puppy stirred, lifting his head as if he had heard the words. His tired eyes met the vet's, and for a brief moment it felt like understanding passed between them. He gave a faint wag of his tail before resting his chin back on the newborn. The man reached out, stroking his fur gently. "No more storms, no more bags to drag. From now on, you're safe." The next morning, he made it official. The puppies weren't just rescues anymore, they were his. He prepared a corner of the clinic with soft bedding, toys, and warmth, a permanent home for the siblings who had fought against fate and won. The community, hearing the news, cheered the decision. Children brought toys, neighbors visited often, and the story of the two brave pups spread far beyond the town. As days turned into weeks, the vet marveled at how far they had come. The golden pup grew stronger, his playful energy returning while the younger one thrived under his watchful eye. Together they filled the once quiet clinic with joy, their bond unbreakable, their future secure. And though their story had begun in tragedy, it now blossomed into something far greater, a new beginning, built on love, courage, and the promise of forever. Weeks turned into months, and the clinic transformed in ways the vet could never have imagined. Where once the halls echoed with silence, Now they rang with the playful sounds of paws skittering across the floor and joyful barks that warmed even the coldest mornings. The golden puppy had blossomed from a frail, rain-soaked wanderer into a lively, protective brother. His fur gleamed under the sunlight, and his once tired eyes now sparkled with energy. The newborn, once on the brink of death, had grown strong, bounding after his older sibling with clumsy steps and cheerful yips. The vet often sat quietly in his chair, watching them play. Each leap, each wagging tail, each affectionate nuzzle was a reminder of the stormy night that had brought them into his life. What began as an act of desperation had become a miracle of survival and love. "You've given me more than I could ever give you," he whispered one evening, smiling as the golden pup curled protectively around his younger brother. The assistant, standing nearby, wiped her eyes. "They're not just dogs anymore," she said softly. "They're a story, a living reminder of hope." Word of the rescue continued to ripple outward, reaching people far beyond the small town. Newspapers picked up the story of the brave puppy who had dragged a bag through the storm to save another life. Photos of the two siblings cuddled together in the clinic spread across social media, touching hearts across the world. Strangers sent letters, donations, and gifts, moved by the loyalty and courage of two tiny lives who refused to give up. The clinic became more than a place of medicine. It became a beacon of compassion. Children visited often, pressing their noses to the glass to watch the puppies play. Elderly neighbors dropped by with home-cooked meals for the vet, insisting he save his energy for the animals. The little family of three, vet, golden pup, and the younger sibling, was no longer alone. They were surrounded by love from a community that had been inspired to see the world a little differently, to act a little kinder, to believe in miracles again. But the most powerful moments were always quiet ones. At night, when the clinic finally stilled, the vet would kneel beside their bedding. The golden pup would look up at him with steady eyes, eyes that seemed older than his small body, as though carrying the memory of that storm forever. The younger one would nestle closer, his soft breath steady and secure. The vet would smile, resting a hand gently on both of them. "No more fear," he whispered. "You're home now. You're safe, and you'll never be alone again." The golden pup would wag his tail faintly, pressing his head into the man's palm, while the younger one let out a sleepy yawn. In those moments, the weight of the world seemed to vanish. All that remained was the bond forged through sacrifice, trust, and the unbreakable will to survive. As the seasons changed and the storm became only a memory, the vet realized something profound. He hadn't just saved them, they had saved him too. They reminded him why he had chosen this path, why compassion mattered even when the world seemed indifferent. And every time he looked at the two dogs, thriving and alive, he knew their story would live on, not just in newspapers or whispers, but in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by their journey. And so, what began as a desperate plea on a stormy night ended as a story of triumph, loyalty, and love. Two fragile lives had been given a second chance, not just to survive, but to truly live. The golden pup had dragged more than a bag that night. He had carried hope itself. And hope, once shared, has the power to warm every heart it touches.